if we fully gave up on ourselves, and we do give up on ourselves in these relationships and deny our every need, want, hope, belief, thought, perception, experience, and our identity, we still can't get this right because we cannot read their minds because it's impossible. So let's set the scene. You're at a birthday party for a friend. Many people are paying attention to somebody who is talking about someone, or something, I should say, that's really interesting that they recently did, and that resulted in some public acclaim for them. So a whole group of people really sort of leaning in, and the story is quite interesting. And the narcissist is also listening and getting increasingly uncomfortable. You can see them sort of stirring in their seat, kind of checking their phone, yawning, kind of staring away. They may even get up and walk around, despite everyone else sitting down and being really engaged in the story. Maybe the narcissistic person will wander back to the conversation and say something like, "Really? Are we still listening to this yawner of a story?" Maybe they'll say something passive-aggressive about the person who's talking or the topic. The narcissistic person may even interrupt and say, "Hey, who wants another round of drinks?" Perhaps the narcissistic person will interrupt and say, "Yeah, it's interesting you're talking about this award. I know the guy who got this award last year. Like, we did this project together." And then the narcissist may even succeed in hijacking the conversation. This is a classical red flag, but many of us, when we encounter, we write it off to other things. And this is a red flag that has a few parts to it. Not only do narcissistic people not like it when they are not the center of attention, they also don't like it when others are the center of attention. And they get visibly uncomfortable. And then lots of different things can happen. So this red flag can show up in a few different ways. So let me break those down for you. First, the narcissistic person may become sullen, sulky, and sort of disconnected. That most often manifests as them sort of, like I said, fooling with their phone, or sometimes with them stepping away. And if you are in a public place, they may even start a conversation with other people who are in that same place that have nothing to do with your group. Many times, this makes other people uncomfortable that the narcissist is sort of broken off. So they will try hard and work hard to try to draw the narcissist back into the conversation because the narcissist sort of seems so glum and victimized and kind of left out. The second thing to look for in this red flag is that the narcissistic person may start making jokes or disparaging the experience of the person who is the center of attention, and particularly at the expense of the person who may be the center of attention. As an example, think of a scenario where the conversation is focused on someone, I don't know, who just got a new job or a new position at a prestigious place, like a prestigious company or agency or university. And people are congratulating them and asking them about it, saying, "Wow, you just got a job at such and such. That's amazing." Well, obviously, this will activate all kinds of shame and inadequacy for the narcissistic person, especially if the narcissistic person is not where they want to be in their lives. And they may then start disparaging and joking and, well, that place where you got that job, gosh, it sounds like a place where being uptight is a way of life. Or they might say something like, "Oh, that's interesting you got that teaching position. Isn't it true that those who can't do teach?" Or they might say something like, "Yikes, I wouldn't want to move there. It must be real nice to live with no culture other than our country fair." If the person who is the center of attention is graceful, they may try to roll with it. But the discomfort will be felt by others, people who are listening to the conversation. Others may uncomfortably laugh along. Third, a narcissistic person may try to hijack the conversation from the person at the center of attention, and the narcissistic person will try to weigh in with their expertise or experiences. I've seen this happen many times when the person who's getting the attention may be sharing a story about an experience they've had, especially when it's sort of a more unique experience, like a travel or an adventure or an accomplishment, or maybe, having an interesting kind of a conversation with someone who's known for something. That's all a little bit too much for a narcissistic person who always has to have the better story. So let's say, for example, the person who is currently getting the attention in a conversation, I don't know, they're talking about a recent work trip to a unique part of the world where they were doing some really interesting, groundbreaking, and kind of cool work. The narcissistic person, uncomfortable about not being the center of attention, may talk about that they've been there too. Yeah, I went there and I stayed there and I did that, or they've done similar kinds of work, or anything that makes their story better. And then they get the attention and control of the conversation. A fourth way this red flag could show up is that the narcissistic person may contradict the person who is the center of attention. They may say things like, well, that isn't true. Actually, that hotel you're staying, you stayed at, that's actually been closed for a while. Or that university doesn't have that major. Or, yeah, I think you said you got that car. Well, that car wasn't made that year. And they will kind of go into petty fact-checking mode. Again, it's often really cringy when they do this, but unless the person who is at the center of the conversation wants to get into an argument, and maybe they will, the conversation may then end with a new topic or something focused on the narcissist, or people just made uncomfortable by the whole way that conversation kind of went off the rails. A fifth way this red flag shows up is that the narcissistic person may just get passive aggressive if they're not the center of attention. They may say things like, yeah, sure, I get it. It makes more sense to let a person who is new in this industry to tell us about it. Yeah, I guess things have changed. When I started in the industry 25 years ago, expertise doesn't matter with all these new ways of doing things. So yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Youth before expertise. And they'll say it all with this look on their face that makes you wonder if they're having gas or some other gastric experience. All of this just turns the attention on them. And they also show this contempt for the person speaking, and it shifts the entire conversational experience. Sixth, the way this red flag can show up is the sort of classical non sequitur. The narcissistic person literally just starts talking about something unrelated to what others are talking about. They make it about something they understand. They make the conversation about something they know about or care about. So a person may be talking about their child's experience, for example, in a math class, and the narcissistic person may not care. So we'll then just say, yikes, math class, who needs it? But has anyone tasted these appetizers? I've been eating at the restaurant that catered this party for years. I know the owner, and these are the best, and paired with this wine, oh, this wine, I've been to this vineyard, I know the owner. And just like that, you go from some story about some kid in a math class, and now you're talking about crostini and wine. Seventh way this red flag shows up is contempt. This can show as groans and sighs and body language and like very contemptuous. Okay, unless the person talking really wants to get into it with the narcissist, all of that body language may end the conversation, and many people just sort of cede the floor to the narcissist because they don't want to be on the receiving end of that contempt and may just sort of walk away from the conversation themselves. This experience of being this experience of being uncomfortable when the narcissist is not the center of attention is a pattern we observe in people who are narcissistic, and also, interestingly, in another personality pattern that's called a histrionic personality pattern. I hate the name, but that's what it's called. That histrionic pattern is about having shallow emotions, needing to be the center of attention, and being uncomfortable when not the center of attention. Histrionic personality is a sort of narcissism light. Some people have called this red flag of narcissists being uncomfortable when they're not the center of attention something called conversational narcissism. The need to take conversations over and make them sources of validation and make every conversation about themselves. It's a great red flag to be aware of because, again, it shows up early. I know, and some of you may be thinking that in some cases, this need to sort of make a conversation more relevant to you could be about social anxiety. People trying to talk about things they know about just to get a toehold into the conversation. But when it's social anxiety, you're not going to see the passive-aggressive stuff, the contempt stuff, and the contradiction stuff. You will see more of the, oh yeah, I've been there too, I've stayed there, and an attempt to nervously fit in to the conversation. So watch for this red flag. It is common, it shows up early, it's uncomfortable to witness, and if you pay attention to it and use it as a sign to say, okay, this person, I think I'm going to probably participate in them from a distance and set up some boundaries early, or maybe just disengage from the relationship, you can avoid a world of hurt. So trauma bonds are created by the alternation of bad and good, a good day and a bad day, idealization and devaluation. Sometime back on my podcast, the actress and writer Rebecca Humphreys, she said it the most beautifully when she said in the narcissistic relationship she was in, it was like getting pushed off a 100-story building, and then the narcissist manages to be the one to catch you just as you're about to hit the ground. So they are not just your abuser, they also become your savior. And that is how trauma bonds get created and reinforced. It only works if we have some attachment and desire. And the desire has to be for the relationship to work. And since these trauma bonds are with people we love, with family members or partners, people we care about, we get caught in this toxic dance that can keep us stuck in perpetuity. So let's take Rebecca's analogy. That one thing that can happen often in toxic relationships is that they devalue, they demean, they insult, they argue. And once they feel better, it's almost like they've let it all out, then they go in for the hug. Let me give you an example of how this can look. Let's say it's a situation where they can't find their keys and they believe that you moved them. They say, hey, where are my keys? Seriously, where are my keys? You may respond, I don't know, I haven't seen them today. They say, yes, you have. You have seen my keys. You had to have seen them. I came home and I put them here, and you always move my stuff. You are so damn disorganized. Look at this mess. You don't put stuff away. I am so sick of it. You have ruined my day. I need to go out in 10 minutes to go pick up that stuff, and if I don't do it, then my entire day is going to be messed up. How could you do this to me? How could you mess with my keys? Now, imagine they're sort of saying this relatively loudly, like I was trying to show, and you really, really did not touch their keys. Some of you may go and try to look for the keys. Others of you may be having a freeze response and just sort of stuck. Some of you may fight back. But most of you will not feel well at this point. There'll be more yelling. They're trying to find them. They're still yelling. Then they say, to hell with it. I am taking your car. Too bad if you need it. And they grab their coat and they put it on, and voila, their car keys are in their pocket. They feel that pocket. They hear the jingle and they say, got 'em. And then I'm heading out. No apology. But as they're about to head out, and this is the part that's not okay, they may come in for a hug. They'll say, okay, come on, let's make up. And they'll come in for the hug or the kiss. You, meanwhile, at this point, may feel once again sick, exhausted, depleted, scared, or triggered, but they want to snuggle or have a kiss, and let's make up makes no sense because they were the ones screaming at you for something you didn't do. So it was largely a one-sided argument, if you even want to call it an argument, because there was no other side to it. Let me give you another scenario. You have an argument with them. They yell and they insult and they invalidate and they scream and they may storm off or leave. And then when you see them later, they come home in a good mood and they just want to snuggle. So this pairing of physical affection, when you have not had the opportunity to process the harms of what they have done, is not good for you. I'm not even sure if you process it, it's good for you. It feels intrusive and uncomfortable. And if you try to push them away or freeze up or don't respond, they're going to tell you that you're difficult and unforgiving. But at a somatic level, to have the person who just psychologically harmed you then try to touch you in a soothing or intimate manner, for a lack of a better way to say it, it feels kind of gross. And once again, you may feel as though there's no response you're allowed to have, because if you push back or don't respond to them, it all starts again. It's always important to remember that narcissistic folks use conflict to regulate. The yelling and the screaming and the abuse allow them to reassert their power. And as they shatter you, they feel better. So after they feel better, and that coupled with their lack of empathy, then as far as they're concerned, everything's fine. And they come in for the hug, or they just assume that you want to snuggle because the argument's done. And they play upon the self-blame and your self-doubt, because when you push back or say, like, I'm not hugging you, we're going to have to talk about this more, or you just say it doesn't feel okay, then you become the bad person who can't let go of stuff. It feels very violating when someone swoops in for a hug or a snuggle or a kiss after they have harmed you, and there has not been a period of time for you to talk it out or work it through. Everything is on their time frame, and the more that happens, the worse it feels. Things in this kind of relationship feel like they are happening to you and not with you. You are basically relegated to being an object, a sort of adult pacifier that they use to regulate. And when they are done with the yelling, they will want to regulate by being held. It's really not much different than a tantruming toddler that screams and cries and just starts yelling in the middle of a store, and then they need a hug from the parent afterwards. But there's a big difference, that toddler is 3, not 53. But many people are confused and really put off and confused by this dynamic. It definitely is something that reinforces, as you can imagine, the trauma bond. And it can also reinforce the sense that somehow you're the one who's closed off, you're the one who's mean, you're the one who's cold or unforgiving if you don't just go with it. It's not true, but it's an absolute catch-22, because there's no way you can talk about it with them, to share your feelings. And then there is the stuckness, and that tees up the self-blame. The key is to understand this dynamic so you can at least start to identify it and slowly maybe even break out of some of the self-blame cycles as well as the self-doubt, because you're not going to really be able to fix the situation. Therapy can be a place to address the feelings that a dynamic like this brings up. But when someone goes from rage to affection, it's very normal to not want to hug back. In fact, almost feel disgusted at the idea of hugging back. It's not you being closed off or distant or holding a grudge. It's that other person of not having no empathy or absolutely no awareness of how their behavior is affecting you. So if that dynamic happens to you, be aware it is quite harmful. It reinforces the trauma bond. And when they simultaneously put themselves in this position as tyrant and tormentor and lover and hugger and carer of perpetrator and then savior, there's really no winning at that game. And it really helps you understand why this relationship is not only so difficult to remain sort of sane in, but even more difficult if you want to get out of. Okay, so let's talk about mind reading, which is such a central part of narcissistic relationships. The paradox of narcissistic relationships is that the person who is experiencing the narcissistic behavior often blames themselves for being selfish or narcissistic. And the narcissistic person largely whines and complains about how they are being mistreated. So let's talk about a fundamental way that this shows up, and one of the impossible corners of the narcissistic relationship. Here is the thing that just almost never happens in a narcissistic relationship. You are never clearly or accurately seen as a separate human being. You simply aren't. Your feelings, experiences, perceptions, beliefs, needs, physical condition, concerns as a separate human being are simply not registered. And that is a weird sort of Twilight Zone thing to get your head around. You are standing in front of someone, of another human being. You're standing in front of them, crying or in pain or sad or having gone through something. And it is a crapshoot whether or not it will be noticed or empathized with or even observed if you are standing in front of a narcissistic person. And then, if it is noticed and registered, then it's yet another crapshoot if it will be regarded with kindness or assistance, or you will be dismissed as being ridiculous or an inconvenience. And what is messed up is this can vary. So there may be a day that you are crying, and someday the narcissistic person may offer some soothing words or a tissue or tell you that they understand why you are crying. And then the next time you're crying, they may roll their eyes and tell you that you're being ridiculous and too sensitive and have no right to feel that way. That is every narcissistic relationship. And because you love or care about or trust or believe you have to believe in this person, for example, it's a family member, you internalize all of these inconsistent ways they show up, and you tell yourself that you are reading the situation wrong. The thing that everyone craves in a narcissistic relationship and never gets, again, like I said, is simply to be seen as a separate human being. Whether that narcissistic person was your parent in childhood and adolescence, or a partner, a sibling, a parent in adulthood, and especially in those key kinds of relationships we have. We just want to be seen. Maybe not even necessarily told we are right or great or even good, but just to be accurately experienced. The word for that is attunement, and it is a natural human need. We are built for it. Human babies need to see their caregiver's face staring at them a lot. In fact, the standard feeding position for an infant, if you're holding them right, is the ideal orientation of the caregiver's face to the baby's face. They need that to foster attachment and to be seen. And it goes from there. When we are adequately and consistently attuned to by someone else, over time we learn to trust ourselves. We build an emotional vocabulary. We have the freedom to develop an identity. And in the best version of this story, we learn that maybe everything we do isn't right, because nobody's perfect, but that we are a human being worthy of being seen and experienced and loved. And that we don't need to become something else other than ourselves for that to happen. Well, that is never going to happen in a narcissistic relationship, because again, we are objects to them that exist to do stuff for them. I'm not going to belabor that point. I've already said it 1,000 times. And heaven knows we can spend literal lifetimes wanting to be seen, right up to the deathbed hope that the narcissistic person will finally get it, and it isn't going to happen. But we get this hope we have of attunement, confused with something that the narcissistic person expects. And then we judge ourselves, wondering if maybe we are behaving as insanely and inconsiderately as them. You may believe that expecting to be attuned to is too much to ask, and that you are even being a bit extra for wanting it. Attunement, folks, is sort of a baseline, fundamental human expectation. And interestingly, one of the pieces of human history that will go down is the day that these stupid devices came into our lives. And not just phones and tablets, but even the computer as a place where we manage everything from schedules to information, all of it. That was the moment when all those daily moments of attunement, a person sitting and looking at us during a simple interaction during the day, disappeared. So we've lost a lot of attunement in the last 20 years. Attunement goes from a basic human experience to what can sometimes feel like a luxury, especially for people who have multiple narcissistic relationships in their lives. And all of this is in contrast to what the narcissistic person expects, who doesn't just want attunement. Because you may be sitting here thinking, well, attunement is a very me, want and desire. And you may wonder, maybe it's narcissistic to expect someone to be attuned to you. But actually, what a narcissistic person wants is not limited to attunement. They want something more. Yes, they expect the attunement. They do expect everything to be focused on them, to be about them. And if it's not about them, they will click out. But they want something more. And what they want is for you to read their mind. Literally anticipate what they want. It's not just attunement, which is when someone comes to us, we do lift our head long enough to hear them and see them and listen to them and recognize them as someone with a separate reality and experience from ours. And that's not okay. Nope. The narcissistic person isn't going to do that. But they actually want you to read their minds, literally. To anticipate what they want, when they want, before they even say it. To anticipate that they're in a good mood. To anticipate when they want to be left alone. To anticipate when they want to have a chat. To anticipate when they didn't want fish for dinner. That you assumed that you knew that they wanted the delivery to be placed in the kitchen. To have made the appointment at the time they wanted, that they didn't share with you, by the way. They expect you to read their minds, and anything less doesn't work. And the messed up part is that we actually try to do it. When the gaslighting is full tilt in these relationships, and we are all the way in the narcissistic system, and this really happens a lot with children who have narcissistic parents, we actually believe that we can do this, that we can anticipate their every need, say the right thing, keep the house organized the right way, bring the right gift, cook the right meal, have the right interests, do the right hobbies, avoid saying the wrong thing, have the right feeling, not express the wrong feeling. You get the idea. Every one of us who has ever had at least one narcissistic relationship in our lives, we tried this. And frankly, if we fully gave up on ourselves, and we do give up on ourselves in these relationships and deny our every need, want, hope, belief, thought, perception, experience, and our identity, we still can't get this right because we cannot read their minds because it's impossible. Infants, baby humans, through about their first year of life, they expect mind reading too. Maybe even a little into their second year. That's why babies cry. But the other reason they cry is they don't have words. It has been argued that the baby doesn't understand that there's a difference between them and that nice person who shows up and feeds and holds them. They don't understand that differentiated, like, I'm different than this. So when that nice person isn't doing exactly what they want at the moment they need it, they yell. And over time, as they develop, and if we get it right enough with them and their little brains develop, they start to realize, oh, it doesn't work this way. And that milk person is separate from me and isn't always available. So I'm going to have to figure some of this out for myself and use my words. And then over time, one day we tie our shoes and we do use our words and we make our beds. The narcissistic person's psyche kind of gets stuck at that infantile phase. Read my mind! And if we don't, they wail and scream because we didn't. And until we do, it's not okay. And all of this is much cuter from a baby than from a 45-year-old man. You aren't asking for the narcissistic people in your life to read your mind. You're hoping for basic attunement. And there's a massive difference. Attunement is natural and human and expectable. If you get used to living without it for long enough, you may start to believe that attunement is rare. And it starts to take a toll on you when you don't get it. You may also start to believe there's something wrong with you, so that's why you don't get attuned to and it's your fault. Or that you're narcissistic for expecting people to be attuned to you. No, attunement is sort of fundamental. It's the core of healthy parenting. And frankly, it's the core of any close, intimate, connected relationship. Mind reading, on the other hand, that's subjugation. It's to be expected or even required to be a mind reader. A person in such a relationship is locked into servitude, existing for another person, and more attuned and aware into understanding that other person than they are for themselves. And that reversal, being there completely for the other person and not at all for the self, that is the core dynamic of the narcissistic relationship. It's the only way it can work. And sadly, for example, many a narcissistic boss expects this of their staff and employees. Narcissistic parents expect this of their children. Things like, you should know that daddy had a bad day and you should have been quiet. Narcissistic parents expect this of their spouses and partners. Narcissistic family members expect this of their other family members. Narcissistic friends expect this of their friends and convince us that it's actually possible to read their minds, and that if we don't do it, then maybe we don't love them, maybe we don't care, maybe we aren't committed, maybe we're selfish. Narcissistic cult leaders, of course, is there any other kind, but narcissistic cult leaders do this to their audiences all the time. You can't read my mind? Well, you must not be committed to the cause. Wanting attunement is healthy and normal. Wanting someone to read your mind is not. And when you ask for or hope for attunement, you aren't asking for mind reading. Don't confuse the unrealistic and dehumanizing demands of the narcissistic relationship with your innate drive for a healthy connection with another human being. Stay in enough narcissistic relationships, or if you get raised by a narcissistic parent, and then you will believe that wants and needs that you may have, such as attunement on your side, are selfish, and yet their want for mind reading is somehow possible. Double standards and hypocrisy are the glue of narcissistic relationships. Everyone deserves to be seen as a separate human being. Everyone. Babies, within a year or two, grow out of the primitive idea that mind reading is a thing. But unfortunately, narcissistic folks don't. Let's talk about the tests of narcissistic loyalty. If you are from a narcissistic family system, then you know this in your bones. There is almost like a gang code level of loyalty that is expected in narcissistic family systems. And this expectation of loyalty actually sets up people for most of the harm that comes out of these relationships. But it's not specific to families or systems, though it can feel more intense there because there's more people demanding it. But I'm sure any of you have been through these relationships, you know this. Narcissistic people expect almost distorted levels of loyalty. And this can often be a major driver of the self-blame and moral injury that often happens for people in these relationships. Depending on the relationship, this can show up in different ways. In families is where we observe this whole loyalty thing, and we see it most pointedly. I don't know, fill in the last name, the Jones family, they stick together, which is really code for there are a few people in this family that do terrible things and may do terrible things to you, and you don't get to say anything about it, or you're being disloyal because we stick together. It brings up the illusion of the family, and blood is thicker than water, and we're all going to band together. And it brands this whole lack of protection, and this place where you have to endure invalidation and mistreatment and keep your mouth shut as part of family loyalty. Like, that's the concept. And by just having to stay in an unsafe place, you then start framing your uncomfortable feeling as you being disloyal. And if you were to push it, to keep bringing it up, keep raising the problems in this family system, then you're the problem because, well, look how disloyal you are to keep making a fuss about this family. This whole disloyalty within the narcissistic family system plays on very fundamental human fears, such as ostracism and alienation and isolation. Every human being wants to belong to something, with rare exceptions, even if that belonging is to a dysfunctional family system. And again, there is no way to safely navigate this if you're a child. A child cannot afford to lose the support of the family. So to be marked as disloyal, as defying the tribe, as it were, that is something no child can hold up under. Kids may cave, and frankly, depending on how severe the trauma or abuse or adversity or whatever it is that child is having to pretend isn't happening, this begins often this is the start of other more significant patterns for a child, such as complex trauma reactions, dissociation, and obviously lots of self-blame in the form of, I'm the bad one. And all the more this gets worse if the child believes or is being made to feel that they're being disloyal. Some families may even have scary stories that they tell about people from the family who were so terrible as to be disloyal. Like, we don't speak to Uncle Charlie so much, or we don't speak to Cousin Susie so much anymore because they weren't loyal. Or there will be legends of those who were shut out of the family because of their lack of loyalty. Again, the younger you, when you are exposed to this mythology, it's really harmful because it creates this real fear of being left out in the cold with no support. The idea of poor Uncle such and such wandering the world without a family because he is disloyal is a lot. But you now know that Uncle such and such was probably ahead of his time and may now be living his best life because he has nothing to do with this family. Now, in intimate relationships, loyalty or lack of loyalty or the being branded as disloyal is often used to isolate people. There is an assumption in some, not all, but many narcissistic relationships, that you have to be all in, that the relationship has to be the most important thing in the world. That, for example, choosing a night out with friends to celebrate someone's birthday, or go away on a weekend with old friends, or even choose to spend time with family is labeled as disloyal, a sort of retrograde positioning of, well, you're in a relationship now, this should be the most important thing for you. So having any kind of meaningful life or relationships that are separate in any way from the relationship can then be viewed as a betrayal of sorts by the narcissistic person you're in a relationship with, and a sort of statement on your lack of loyalty. And this can feel really messed up, when in fact, the narcissistic person has betrayed you in the past, and yet they are calling you out on your lack of loyalty. I mean, hypocrisy is one of the love languages of the narcissistic relationship. Your lack of loyalty in an intimate relationship may also kind of come up or be brought up to you if you may agree with someone else, which may mean then you're not agreeing with your narcissistic partner, right? You agree with someone else's opinion, you don't agree with the narcissistic person. Your narcissistic partner may then view you as taking sides and not being loyal. And this can really sting if you actually do value yourself as being a loyal person and as someone who really hasn't betrayed the narcissistic person. But you keep getting this disloyal label thrown on you. In friendships, again, we can see a similar pattern. The narcissistic friend may view you as disloyal for branching into other friend groups or not pulling them into a new group of people that you've met. A narcissistic friend, again, may do what they want when they want, but still feel as though they have some sort of control over who you socialize with and how you socialize. Again, there's that hypocrisy. And especially if this is an old friend you've had for a very long time, there may be a tendency for them to take the stance of, oh, I've known you forever and you chose them. You're so disloyal. You can sort of feel stuck. It's as though you have to choose the high school or childhood or college friend who has been around for a long time and feel a loyalty to them, but also that you can't branch out into new friendship groups or interest groups without the old narcissistic friend's permission, or without them coming along. And remember, narcissistic friendships can be very difficult to wriggle out of, especially because of things like guilt and pity. Then, of course, there is the workplace, where loyalty is already kind of touted as a workplace value. But in a narcissistic workplace, it may be positioned as, if you question something, such as a bad policy or an unfair policy, that you're being disloyal. If you don't pitch in more than you're being paid for, you're being disloyal. If you consider looking for another job or a better job or a job with more opportunity, then you are being disloyal. Disloyalty accusations can be a way to control folks, gaslight them about their commitment to the job, or even imply a lack of commitment that would then make you less desirable for a promotion in that kind of an organization. And in really narcissistic workplaces, anything you may do to have some kind of balance in your life, but doesn't always put work as the priority for you, is often branded by narcissistic bosses and managers as you being disloyal. And it's interesting because this is coming up more and more with shifts in the workplace. Folks who don't want to have to come into the office all the time and can get some of their job done at a remote site are now being hit with disloyalty accusations and about not being on board with the team and the workplace community because you want to continue sort of a hybrid work arrangement. Now, these accusations of disloyalty, they come from a few places. I'd say, first of all, they come from good old entitlement on the part of the narcissistic person. Narcissistic people sort of feel entitled to all of you, your time, your thoughts, your life. So if you attempt to exert yourself as something separate for them, well, then you're being disloyal to them. In addition, narcissistic people do not take responsibility or accountability, and they'll often project blame for their bad behavior onto other people. And so calling you disloyal for what they characterize as sort of breaking ranks, when all you are doing is maybe drawing their attention to something they did that was harmful, or something harmful that was happening in a relationship or a family or a workplace or a friend group, means not only do they not have to take responsibility, it's also a gaslight, because being accused of disloyalty when you are calling them out on a problem makes you the problem. And since enablers and other people who might be benefiting from or comfortable with the status quo of the system are often more interested, like I said, in keeping the system going than protecting people within it, the narcissistic folks often get to keep on keeping on, and you get to be viewed as disloyal. This accusation of disloyalty is a sort of tool for squelching individuation. How dare you be you? How dare you do something you want or need? Well, using that big disloyalty word there can shut that down. You're doing something for yourself. And it can keep people stunted and stuck in a version of themselves that works in the relationship or the system or for the narcissist, but it's not your true self. This whole disloyalty universe is often what keeps everyone in the system locked into limiting, stunted spaces until you finally get it and can make steps towards setting yourself free. in any kind of group system, call it what you will, workplaces, families, this whole loyalty thing can get really dark. And since in many systems, at least for some period of time, the narcissistic person is the one with a lot of the power, the narcissistic person is always going to reward the most loyal person, even if that loyalty means that in order to earn the narcissistic person's designation of you as loyal, you have to throw other people under the bus. Now, this can feel uniquely cruel in families, where you may, for example, share a confidence or a secret with a family member and even told them about something maybe that was hurting you. And instead of protecting you, they run to the narcissistic person so they can be the loyal one and stay in the glow and receive the indulgences of the narcissistic person. And so now the narcissistic person may view you as even more disloyal, and you have been harmed, and now you're being betrayed by someone in that system, family or workplace, that you may have thought that you could trust. And now that this issue, whatever it is, has been shared, the harm to you in the system may now even be worse. This volleying and jockeying for power and getting the narcissistic person to notice them is a core of triangulation. Everyone in the family or in the workplace kissing the proverbial ring, trading on anything to stay close to the narcissistic parent, the narcissistic patriarch, matriarch, whomever, getting that protection, being viewed as loyal, and magnifying the harms of the narcissistic person through the system. If you have ever been betrayed in this way, you know exactly what I'm talking about. A very similar dynamic shows up in narcissistic workplaces, where folks try to stay close to the narcissistic boss or leader and never speak against their policies, no matter how terrible or potentially harmful those policies are, throw people under the bus, even snitching on people. And in fact, narcissistic leaders and bosses will encourage people in the workforce to snitch and turn people in, who may either be saying bad things about the narcissistic leader or are uncomfortable with the shifts in the workplace or not following policies to a T. And the minions and the enablers of the narcissistic leader or boss will then gleefully turn folks in to get the glow of the narcissistic person's whatever. And it feels very Orwellian. And these people who turn people in are, again, rewarded by the narcissistic boss, and everyone else is harmed, and fear can cut through the entire system. Everyone in these systems who gets to stay becomes a yes person. The narcissistic boss is well supplied, and these stories never end well. We are taught that loyal is good, that it's a virtue, to stand by someone, to stand for a cause, a system, a country, whatever it is. Sadly, what we learn in narcissistic relationships is that loyalty is a one-sided commitment. It is often weaponized. It's used as a tool to keep people in line and to ostracize or silence them when they won't go along. And because belonging is such a universal need, others in the system who just want it to keep running and keep existing may pile on the bandwagon of viewing the person being labeled as disloyal as the problem instead of seeing the real source of it, the narcissistic person. It's tricky because since we are taught that loyalty is good and under the right circumstances loyalty is good, and then we are then told that we are not loyal people by the narcissistic folks and their enablers, it just leaves us feeling like we are bad, disloyal people, and that, especially if it starts young, can become part of our identity. Narcissistic folks force this loyalty from families and colleagues and employees and make it part of the transaction of the relationship. And many a person has believed that they can win over or get on the good side of the narcissistic person through this absolutely overplayed loyalty. And people who do that will either go down with the ship if the narcissistic person ever goes down, and all that loyalty that the narcissistic person demanded from you will all be forgotten because a narcissistic person has no problem with other people taking the fall for their sins. So basically, all that loyalty you had to the narcissist gets repaid with narcissistic betrayal. Or it could be that the loyal players are asked one day to do the thing they cannot do, the true test of loyalty. And this is a common play by more severely narcissistic and psychopathic people. In fact, it's a play often used in cultic systems. Loyalty is cemented by someone being willing to do something in utter violation of their own values. And the moral injury and self-disgust can pile up, especially if you do some of it. Or the person may finally say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And then bam, all those years of loyalty down the toilet, just like that. The first time loyal you says no. It's all or nothing in the world of narcissistic loyalty, and they will keep moving those goalposts to the point where you're having to do things that you may never forgive yourself for. So part of healing is testing that sense of yourself as a disloyal person. Lots of folks who get out of narcissistic relationships and families and workplaces will say, I actually believed I was not a team player. I actually did believe that I was a disloyal person. And it can take a while to build that sense back up that in fact you were loyal, but that what was being asked of you wasn't about loyalty. It can also take a lot of time just to build back what a healthy sense of loyalty is. It's not one-sided. It's not supposed to be a test, and it's not meant to be a weapon. And it is not meant to be that loyalty is that you do things in violation of your values, ethics, or the law. If you do get roped into the sense of being loyal to a narcissist, you will get burned. And it can be a steep climb back up to a balanced, thoughtful, and reasonable sense of loyalty. But be careful of this entire framework of loyalty in a narcissistic relationship. Sometimes we're so focused on wanting to prove the narcissistic people wrong. Hell with you, I'm so loyal. But then you're almost playing into a trap. Because in that case, loyalty often means sticking around or doing the things that don't feel right or giving into a structure that doesn't feel aligned with who you are. So it's a messy space, and many, many survivors can take years to get back to a place where they recognize that they are actually loyal, and that can really show up well for them in healthy systems. But that takes a minute. Thanks again.